Everyone knows that game development takes a long time, but it's been 7 months since my last update on Steam, and that's just way too long. I'll be breaking this dry streak soon, but I want to share some of the progress I've made and try to explain why development has been so slow. Even though I never stopped working on the game, I sort of got stuck in a rut of reworking the same content over and over again. The good part of doing this is that everything gets better with each iteration, but the bad part is how much time it takes. This is a common issue that a lot of people have, and I've seen it explained with the 80-20 rule. There's this idea that the first 80% of development progress requires only 20% of the total development time, and then the remaining 20% of progress actually takes 80% of the total time. It seems backwards, but this 80-20 rule is used in lots of real-world scenarios. In my case though, it helps explain why development has gotten more time-consuming. At first my game was small, and adding new content was really quick and easy. But as the game got bigger though, I had to constantly revisit old ideas and old code and make it compatible with all the new systems. And this problem became exponentially more of an issue over time. For me, there were 3 core parts of the game where I really noticed this 80-20 rule, and the first one is what I tend to struggle with the most. The old version of the game already looks pretty decent. Really, you could say that it's about 80% of the way there. It's that remaining 20% of the progress that really ties everything together. The game looks so much better now compared to before, and it's thanks to a few specific changes. I made the color palette less green and more blue, like a moonlit night. I manually changed these colors in the tile sheet, but also I made lots of improvements to the shaders. I'm able to mix the colors in-game and adjust them based on which map I'm in, so different areas could have unique vibes, even when they're using the same tiles. The lighting is another thing I worked a lot on. In the old version of the game, I was going for stylized light sources, but after messing with it a lot, I eventually realized that softer edges on each light source was the better way to go. I was able to get every light to overlap with each other nicely too, which is something I've always struggled with doing. In general, I'd say I've gotten a lot more comfortable working with shader code, like GLSL, but I've still got a lot to learn. On the topic of lights, I also made the choice to get rid of darkness as a gameplay mechanic. There were areas in the old version of the game that were pitch black, and you had to use a light source. Even though this makes sense, and a lot of games have levels like this, I really feel like darkness is more annoying than anything. It makes the area a little more challenging, but increasing the difficulty by hiding everything in darkness doesn't seem very fun to me. And let me know if you disagree though, I'm always open to different opinions on stuff like this. The last big improvement to the visuals is the new decorations. There's a lot more grass, more texture on the ground, there's more interesting particles in the air, and a lot of the sprites look better than they used to. It all serves to make the levels look more interesting and more full. And speaking of levels, I talk all the time about how time-consuming level design is, but what I haven't really talked about is how backwards my approach to level design was when I first started working on this game. I always believed that the game's mechanics were the only real thing that mattered, and that the levels were only fun because the game mechanics made them fun. And this is sort of true. A game like Mario 64 is fun to run and jump around, even in a big empty area with no obstacles or challenges. It just took me a while to learn that good level design paired with good mechanics is the secret to making the whole experience amazing. It didn't help that when I was starting development on this game, I really didn't enjoy level design, and I wasn't good at it either. I originally designed the game with procedurally generated dungeons, mostly because I hoped that it would add more content without me needing to design a bunch of levels. There are games where procedurally generated content is great, and it adds a lot to the gameplay, but in my case, I think I was treating it as a way of avoiding level design altogether. And my plan didn't work, because even though the procedural levels were fun, I remember always thinking that a manually designed version of each dungeon would turn out better. And it's not just the dungeons either. The overworld is meant to be explored, and if the world is not designed in an interesting way, then players won't be interested in exploring it. I've always known my game had a really simple gameplay loop to it. You explore for a bit, then you fight for a bit. Explore some more, fight some more. The point of this cycle is for the sake of pacing. You shouldn't have a game that's constant non-stop action with no downtime. That would get exhausting for players. But also, a game that's entirely calm, no tension at all, that'll probably get boring after a while. I'm realizing now that the level design is what leads to good pacing. And on top of that, without good level design, exploration just isn't fun. I've spent so much time over the past year redesigning the exact same maps over and over. Each time was getting better, but I would always eventually find some new other way to improve the overall flow. because it's not just a level by level basis, it's also how the levels lead into other levels, and how they interconnect with each other in meaningful ways. That's the part of exploration that I personally really like, and the old version of the game didn't have enough thought put into this. And the last thing I didn't put enough thought into is the enemy AI. I think that the combat in my game is one of the strongest aspects. The enemies that you fight, though, are hit and miss. The bosses are a lot of fun to fight, but the normal enemies are way too basic. I talked in a previous video about some of these improvements where originally enemies would just mindlessly chase down the player, but now enemies can mix things up by retreating, which leads to a lot more movement around the battlefield. It's one challenge to program an enemy to behave this way, but the other challenge is making all of that behavior modular, where the code I write can be utilized in multiple places. The idea is to make new enemies, give them new abilities, and then those abilities become available for me to use on other enemies later on. This applies to bosses too, by the way, since bosses are just regular enemies that are bigger and have more attacks. To go along with this, the game's difficulty is constantly being adjusted. This is going to continue to be tweaked up until the very end of development, but it's still something I'm working on with each new fight that I test out. This includes basic stuff like how much health the enemies have, or how much armor each weapon provides for the player. But it also includes small details of the enemy's AI, like the speed of each animation, the size of attack hitboxes, how precise their aim is, and how multiple enemies interact with each other during the encounter. My goal isn't to make difficult enemies, it's to make them fun to fight. And this includes providing a challenge, but I think making enemies somewhat predictable as well makes the experience more fun for players. It's like a Dark Souls or Elden Ring boss. You die a lot at first, but after a couple attempts, you get a feel for what type of attacks the boss is going to use at any given time, and it allows the player to make predictions and look for openings. The best fights are able to combine these predictions with the player's ability to react to unexpected things. If a boss was completely unreadable and there was no way to predict its behavior at all, then the fight would entirely be a reaction test with no real strategy. But on the other hand, you can't make an enemy too predictable, otherwise it becomes way too easy to fight and dodge all of the attacks. I still have some room for improvement with my enemy AI and making fights more fun, but overall I think it's a huge step up from the old version of the game. At this point, I'm really close to getting the updated demo available on Steam, but there's still a lot of testing and updates to go before I reach that point. As always, I'll announce any big updates on this YouTube channel, but if you'd like to be more looped in, feel free to join the Discord. And if you're able to, the best way to support the game is to wishlist Moonshire on Steam. The more wishlists it has, the better the game will perform in the Steam algorithm once it releases. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video to the end, and if you have any thoughts on this new video format, let me know in the comments. I'm wanting to experiment a bit with my videos, and I'd like to know if you notice any issues with this new, filming format. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one.